Welcome to the beat. I'm Ari Melber, and we're tracking several developments, including around the world. We have now the first American born Pope. That follows a progressive pontiff there, and we are going to track what that means for everyone coming up. You have Catholics and many others celebrating today. We have that coming up later in the hour. Also, later, Trump actually becoming his own worst enemy as his words are quoted back to the lawyers trying to defend some of the deportation cases in that uphill battle. It is not going well. And we're looking at how what he says in public is haunting him in court. We begin, though, with the markets. We've had these recession fears. We have a lot of Americans concerned about what they're living through, what they're feeling in the problems with Donald Trump's trade war and tariffs. There's new polling that actually shows this is not a left-right issue anymore, not one that goes half and half. This is 75%, a big majority of Americans concerned that the tariffs will juice prices. 61% want businesses to actually say when the tariffs are affecting prices. Again, that's something the Trump administration has opposed. There was some back and forth with different retailers about it. Trump was angry and posting specifically about Amazon and Jeff Bezos about it. Ford raising prices on 3 different cars today and saying that the trade war will cut into their profits by over $1 billion. These are the examples of what's been going. If you follow the news, some days it's the top story, some days there's other things going on. If you turn on the financial news or read the Wall Street press, it's every day. Toyota says the decline's not going to be a couple points here, but rather 20%, a fifth of their total profits, all because of Donald Trump's decision to stick to these tariffs. So it's not going well by all of those measurable ways to look at it. The American businesses that we hear from, small, medium, and large, say the tariffs are bad. Most governments view this as a kind of a very Trumpian specific escalation, not something that was inevitable or the normal course of trade this year, just something that Trump barreled right into. In fact, when I show you 75% of Americans concerned about the tariffs, you have to look around to find people who still think this might be a good idea. Here's Fox News' Laura Ingraham.
No one wants what Trump is doing except, the MAGA crowd, the reset crowd. Wall Street doesn't want to do this.
That's part of how she was teeing up the issues to, of course, one of the Trump officials who's involved in all this. Trump is trying to sell austerity, but that's at odds with everything that he said during the campaign, right? That we would get prosperity and right away. Trump's Treasury Secretary says kids might have fewer dolls, but they'll get in exchange economic freedom, which has become a national punchline.
Yes, if there's one thing children love, it's the concept of economic freedom. They're raising prices on Barbie. Even she has to cut back. She had to move out of Barbie's dream house and into Barbie's dream studio apartment with 2 roommates. Her pink convertible is now a 2007 Toyota Tercel. It's very sad. Come on, don't make Barbie tighten her belt even more. She only has a 1-inch waist.
The Barbie jokes can kind of give us all a little moment to exhale, but the punchline there that works, and it works regardless of who you voted for, or people who wanted a change from Biden, or people who thought Trump would bring prosperity like he said he would. This isn't really about the partisan imprint from last year's election. This is now about the governing of President Trump and how it's actually going. And people don't think it's going well. The punchline is there isn't really a good other side of this debate. MAGA figures are looking at the trade deficits. And remember, it's complicated, we've heard from economists, but by the Trump plan, meaning what he said this was about, was dealing with the trade deficit countries, China, Mexico, Vietnam. Those are the big countries you see there where he says we're getting the raw end of the deal. That's what he and his allies have fixated on.
With respect, are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal because you're a president who needs a result at a difficult time?
I think that it's a great deal for both parties.
Now,
the world has been coming to the U.S., and China has been the missing piece.
China wants to do something. And look, they have to at this point. Essentially, they made $1 trillion a year. We almost had a deal with China where we're going to open up China. It was almost done.
China has taken over 60,000 of our factories, over 5 million manufacturing jobs. The conflict we're having with them cannot be understated, and we have to be clear-eyed about that.
All right, so as far as Trump aides are concerned, including Peter Navarro, who's been on this program, can't be understated or overstated. It is just the biggest deal to go after China and those other countries I showed you where you have this gap. So that's the whole priority. If you hear Donald Trump pop up today, tomorrow, or next week talking about other countries and other stuff, by his measure, forget anyone else, by his measure, that is not what the trade war is about. It's not why he started the tariffs, because again, he wanted to make up for the big deficit countries where basically he says America's getting a raw deal because we're buying more than we're selling, yada, yada, yada. That's his metric. Now, in addition, I can tell you, if you want to get into sort of the economics of fact checking, and it's not black and white, but most mainstream economists have said, economic experts, economists, professors, and people in the markets who do this day by day, they say that you actually don't think of trade deficits as automatically bad. Indeed, there are many occasions where you want to run trade deficits. To pick a very simple example, if you're a country that doesn't have the weather to make bananas, then you're going to have a banana deficit because you want to ship them into your country. That deficit isn't good or bad. It's just a product of reality. You don't make bananas, you can't grow them here. People want them, you buy them. Add 100 other products and you get the idea. But again, Trump says these tariffs will deal with what he calls these concerning trade deficits with those countries like China and other countries in Asia. So keep that in mind when you learn that this week, you may have seen this if you've been on your phone or the internet today, Trump has announced a relatively small partial agreement, but it's not with China. It's not with Vietnam. It's with the United Kingdom. And the United States, if you're using the Trump measure, runs a trade surplus with them to about $12 billion last year. This kind of handshake trade deal does not end all the tariffs. Bloomberg reports the framework basically leaves many key details for later. Key issues unresolved. Apparently, the goal is to get some sort of claim of a deal or a partial deal headline out there and save the hard stuff for later. Paul Krugman, the Nobel-winning economist, says that pretending to fix what's broke seems to be the order of the day, and it may or may not happen. He also calls this the tariff equivalent of concepts of a plan. One of the Trump campaign gaffes when he couldn't really say what the healthcare plan was last year. Now, in this new framework, 10% tariffs on many UK products remain. So as I'm telling you, it's a deal, but not a deal that ends the ramping up of his trade war with that and other countries. The tariffs would be reduced, they say, for cars and steel. No final UK deal. No agreements with the priority countries. And obviously not only no deal, but not even the concepts of the step of an initial set of negotiations with China, where the big Trump tariffs are at 145%, where supply chains are disrupted, where we've had experts say the shelves in America may run bare. And no amount of Bloomberg headlines about partial deals with England are going to change that reality that is barreling at American consumers and voters. So we're going to get into all that with two special guests next. We're talking trade war, and we are joined by the Reverend Al Sharpton, the host of Politics Nation, president of the National Action Network, a man who's known Donald Trump for a long time and is fresh off the Met Gala. Catherine Rampell, host of MSNBC's The Weekend and a Washington Post columnist. Welcome to both of you. We'll get to the economics because I walked through why this wasn't the deal that they had promised. But what do you think of what they're selling? Because, Rev, this is Trumpian politics first. You want headlines about some kind of deal before the actual trade negotiators reach a deal.
And to say that you want some kind of deal is absurd. I mean, he promised on day one many things he hasn't delivered. And now I think you said it best, to sell austerity rather than prosperity is something that is miles away from what he told his own constituents, but I think, or his own supporters. But I think what is even more important is that he does not have a deal. There is no deal. He's announced something with England today that we really don't know what that really means. We don't know what's going on with China. They can't even agree with who called the meeting. And in the interim, we have Mother's Day coming up Sunday. Flowers are up. He's telling kids that they can't have dolls. I mean, this is the worst of Trump fumbling the ball. And I think that a lot of the voters that supported him are starting to get voters' remorse or buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse, yeah.
Because I think that he clearly has not only not did what he said, he's doing the opposite. It's causing inflation, it's causing it to stay where it is or rise, and it's going to cause a lot to his base, farmers and others that depend on a lot of the things that he's putting tariffs on.
Yeah, and Catherine, we've seen that in the new polling that the tariffs are getting less popular the more people hear about them. We all cover stuff, right? There aren't a lot of 75% issues in American politics, really. I mean, you tell people what Biden did or Trump did, right away you start to get a fissure. 75% and growing is the concern. And I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that those Republicans are turning Democrat in the midterms. It just means they were rooting for Trump. They do like him, and they're still mad and concerned about tariffs. Where does the deal fit into that?
Well, Trump is essentially demanding wartime sacrifices from the American people, even as he's giving himself a military parade that will cost tens of millions of dollars. He's saying that we're going to have higher prices not only on dolls, he's acknowledging higher prices on all sorts of baby goods, strollers. He was asked about that explicitly in the NBC Meet the Press interview over the weekend. Today, he even said maybe we'll raise the tariffs on Mattel even higher. Mattel, which is the company that makes Barbie and Hot Wheels and a lot of other popular kids' toys, which he mistakenly thought was a country somehow.
Yeah, you know what? We'll play that.
I'd love that.
Mattel, I don't know. I'm not so sure. They also said they're the only country I've heard. They said, "Well, we're going to go counter. We're going to try going someplace else." That's okay. Let him go, and we'll put 100% tariff on his toys, and he won't sell one toy in the United States, and that's their biggest market. I heard that. I mean, I watched this guy talking about how I'm going to go counter. I said, "Well, I wouldn't want to have him as an executive too long."
I have no idea what any of that means, except that it's going to raise prices even higher. You asked about the UK trade deal, and I'm using scare quotes deliberately. There is no deal here. First of all, there was no problem that needed solving. As you laid out earlier, even if there were a trade deficit with another country, that doesn't mean they're taking advantage of us. It turns out we actually have a trade surplus with the UK.
Right.
So on many levels, this makes no sense. There's no problem to be solved. And there's also no real solution that has been proposed. I guess we're a little bit better off today than we were yesterday because some of the tariffs got taken down from 25% to only 10%. For example, on British cars, Rolls-Royces and Bentleys and other things I'm sure Americans are really concerned about the prices of. But we're definitely not better off than we were before Trump launched this multi-front trade war around the world.
Yeah, I don't even know if Rev likes Bentleys. He might prefer the Maybach. And I think you took a designer van to the Met, if I saw the photos correctly.
You were seeing the wrong photos, but
it was like a big thing you got out of.
Yeah, I got it. I don't even know
it's like
what
a bus.
It is. Yeah, it's a bus.
Yeah.
That's what we had to ride. But
you see, Catherine, I know Rev so well that I can seed this into the larger conversation. But please, go ahead.
But I mean, it would be insulting to me if I was a blue-collar worker in one of the states that he won, and he's giving a reduction in tariffs to Rolls Royces and Bentleys and not concerned about things that I need to keep my business going, small businesses, farms. These are the people that he campaigned and rallied, and he rewards the elite, super rich, which he is a part of and which his cabinet is. I think that it is adding insult to injury.
And actually, I spoke with an economist today, Ed Gresser, who's at the Progressive Policy Institute, who's a trade economist. And I was asking him what kinds of Americans are going to be hurt most by these tariffs. You know, we know to some extent who buys more imported goods than others. And far and away, lower income people are going to be hurt the most, but also single parents going to be hurt. Rural Americans, more so than urban Americans, again, more likely to be Trump voters. And among other groups, military families. Military families are likely to be hurt more than civilian families. So, it'd be bad if it hurt people in blue states too, or diehard liberals. But just think about how much he is hurting his own base. To what end?
Well, and that's why it might be different than we've talked about rule of law, autocratic issues. Some people are concerned about deportations because they think it's wrong, or they understand if there's no due process that can affect you. But plenty of other people may not even hear about it, right? You're describing why it matters when people have this lived reality. And Trump's approach here has been to just sell everything upside down, austerity or, hey, it's not happening. So most people involved in our economy know that you need activity and commerce to have jobs. So you can have your college seminar about capitalism and yada, yada. But most people say, yeah, well, we want things up, not down. You want people in the streets, you want people going shopping. It's not complicated. So when Trump is asked about the ports drying up, he's selling something that I don't think, as you said, MAGA or not, people think is a good thing. Take a look.
Because business has slowed down, as you mentioned, we're
China.
seeing as a result, the ports here in the U.S., the traffic has really slowed, and now
That's good.
thousands of dock workers and truck drivers are worried about their jobs.
Yeah, no, that means we lose less money. When I see that means we lose less money.
No, that's just not true. It's just not true. Not only are consumers going to be hurt by the fact that prices are going up and there will be shortages, whether we're talking about, dolls from China, strollers, or produce from Latin America, there are a lot of workers who are going to be harmed by all of this too. In that little clip that you showed, they talked about dock workers and truck drivers. We've seen layoffs there, or people having their hours cut back, but we're also seeing it in manufacturing. For example, Volvo announced, I think either today or yesterday, that they were having to cut staff at their South Carolina plant because they are hurt by tariffs too. When you tariff the inputs that manufacturers need, that hurts American workers as well. And Trump just seems to have no curiosity, or he's impervious to facts. I don't know, but he's obsessed with this.
You kind of know. You know a little bit.
Maybe.
Well, he's also insulting. I mean, to say that we'll lose less money, so will the workers, so will the farmers. They'll lose less money because they'll have less money to lose. And to act like people are buying $30. I mean, we laugh at what he said, but when you really look at it, is he suggesting that we're just gouging dolls and it's really no big thing? That in and of itself is offensive.
Well, and that speaks to the elitism, right, which is so interesting because Trump has always managed to move on a different scale because he was this reality show star and the party we know is loyal. Everybody knows that, I think, who follows the news. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have gas. The doll thing is haunting him day after day after day because it's the kind of thing you say if you have no interaction with the real world.
Right.
Sure, there are some rich people who have endless toys, but most people save up and budget out holidays, vacations, gifts for their children. And those gifts aren't 10 of everything, right? I mean,
Let's know 30. I mean, to suggest that goes into that whole thing of the overconsumption of people, poor people or working class people. They don't have $30. What do you mean down to 2? So it suggests this kind of penthouse elitism that he thinks like that about people that have to work every day for a living.
Absolutely.
And I do want to emphasize, it's not only these special occasions like Christmas that will be affected that feel very far off.
Right.
It's going to be shortages on shelves sooner than that if these tariff policies stay in place for groceries, for basic goods, diapers, all sorts of things that Americans buy that they can't find good substitutes for because they're not made in America, or they can't switch away.
Yeah, and that all of this is not some macro recession. It's a government-made, Trump-made set of results, which is really striking. So I want to thank Catherine and Rev and mention we've got the primetime show there, the Weekend Prime Time, Politics Nation, weekends, 5 p.m. Eastern. Rev is coming back. Later in the show, we get into the first American Pope, which is a big deal, matters to a heck of a lot of folks, and is ricocheting around the world. There's also a new threat that's shaking the Republican speaker. But Trump has a big problem in court now. It involves judges quoting what he is saying back to his DOJ lawyers in some deportation cases that they've been losing. Now, Trump has faced many lawsuits in these first 105 plus days, all about whether he is exceeding his powers. In court, we are now seeing how this is going, and I've been following this with you. We're all kind of going through it together. Some of it's reminiscent of the first term and other Trump issues we've all lived through as a country. Other parts are evolving a little differently because Donald Trump now is verbally more brazen than he was, say, in the first year of the first term, and that's hurting him in court. In these arguments over the mistaken deportations, a federal judge literally citing President Trump's own statement. And like everyone else, of course, he has a right to silence. He could stay out of it. Sometimes he does because he'll defer and say, hey, check with the agency or the DOJ. But when he gets in these TV interviews and wants to sound a certain way, now that stuff, his words, are hurting him. For example, the Supreme Court asked to facilitate, it's an order, facilitate the return of this individual. Trump admitted out loud in the TV interview he could do that. He could pick up the phone and arrange for the detainee's release.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
Good question, and clearly it got to him. We've seen sometimes this president and some other politicians as well don't like to admit in questions that, for example, they don't have a power. But that was the DOJ's partial defense, that somehow they can't get the guy back. He's over there. Then the president says, I could do it. Well, if you can do it and the Supreme Court said do it, you're in a tougher spot. That's me just kind of saying it in plain English. Here's what happened in court. The judge pressing Trump's DOJ lawyer. Was the president telling the truth when he said he could pick up the phone and have Mr. Abrego Garcia released or not? DOJ struggling to answer, and the judge then cited a video that you may have come across of the DHS secretary where she was bragging about this foreign prison where the Trump administration has admitted this particular detainee shouldn't even have been sent, but bragging that it's actually part of the Trump American toolkit.
But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
All right. It's pretty straightforward. But that's boomeranging in court, where the judge asked, quote, is she wrong about that? DOJ's lawyer saying, well, sometimes public statements lack the nuance of any given situation. The judge pressing, is that another way of saying these statements, this time about a Trump official, quote, just aren't true? DOJ replies, no, Your Honor, I'm not saying that at all. Now, there's a pattern here where Trump's own words and some of the more kind of braggadocious claims of some of his officials undercut the actual government claims about what they're doing and why they're doing it. A judge citing this speech when handing Trump a loss in that bid to abuse federal power with executive orders to go after law firms that have represented people that Trump simply disagrees with.
Have you noticed that lots of law firms have been signing up with Trump? $100 million, another $100 million for damages that they've done. But they give you $100 million and then they announce that, but we have done nothing wrong. And I agree, they've done nothing wrong.
Donald Trump entered politics as the most litigious person to ever run for president. He knows what he's doing there. He's referring to what is sometimes called a no-fault settlement, where there is money exchange, but people then get to say, well, nobody did anything wrong. He is being sarcastic or facetious and suggesting they did do something wrong. But the larger effort, which again, he's having trouble in the long term defending in court, is whether the White House can pick its enemies and punish law firms and go after lawyers they don't like. Because for all the lawyer jokes and all the talk about lawyers, this system, the Western canon system, US, UK, these countries, we rely on lawyers to defend people's rights, including the people who are most attacked and marginalized by the more powerful government, which is why you can go all the way back to Shakespeare, which this judge did in this very ruling, noting that it was a cringeworthy twist on that phrase, quote, let's kill all the lawyers, saying the president takes the approach of let's kill the lawyers I don't like. I want to get into this with someone that is an expert and who I've known in and around the law for a long time. Aziz Hook is law professor at the University of Chicago, former clerk for Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the author of several books, including How to Save a Constitutional Democracy, and not the reason that we tracked you down, but full disclosure, someone I worked with back in the early days. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ari. I promise any Ari Melba the intern stories are exclusively for my memoir.
Well, I'm sure that memoir will be of interest to fellow some legal nerds. What do you think about these judges hitting the point where they are saying what anyone would say in plain English, which is the president flouting the law and bragging about it, or is he lying? On the evidence of the deportation case, it has to be one of the two.
The political strategy pursued by the Trump administration has focused upon its willingness to break boundaries that other administrations have respected. And because of that, obviously, politicians like Mr. Trump, like Ms. Noem, tout the fact that they are doing things that are across the edge of the law. And what we're seeing in the decisions that you went through just now is that that strategy comes back to haunt them when they have to defend those matters in court. That doesn't mean they're going to lose these cases eventually, but it does make it much more difficult for the government lawyer to stand up with a straight face and make what, in other cases, might be a winning argument.
And do you see a kind of declining patience here? Because judges do say in both parties, politicians are known to speak more broadly, more vaguely, sometimes in misleading ways that will not be held to the letter of the law in every case, an old campaign vow, for example. And yet here they seem to be taking quite seriously what he's saying as undercutting the DOJ's defense.
I think we see judges like Judge Boasberg in the D.C. District Court palpably, visibly running out of patience. But I would be really cautious before assuming that that will happen at higher levels of the judiciary structure, in particular at the Supreme Court level. And I just remember, or I just recall to people's attention what happened in the first Trump administration around the Muslim ban. So one of the first measures that President Trump promulgated in his first term was a bar on people coming from a number of Muslim majority countries. During his campaign, during his presidency, he repeatedly justified this measure on explicitly racist, explicitly Islamophobic, anti a particular religion turns of phrase. Now, when the Supreme Court upheld a version of the ban, it recognized, it quoted those words and said, in a passage that baffles not just legal scholars, but ordinary readers, yeah, that was the president speaking in his personal campaigning capacity, but we're dealing with the official presidency here. So one should always, it's always good to remember that judges have all sorts of tricks in their bag to turn, to deflect the obvious implications of things that you and I see.
Yeah. Let me ask you about something related. We looked at those cases. One of the big important prosecutor jobs is the D.C. job, which makes sense if you think about the Jan 6 cases or old stuff. More happens in certain parts of the country, including Washington, D.C. The president had put up an extremely radical and controversial individual for that post and has now withdrawn that name. The headline here, the extremism tested limits for even today's GOP senators. And we've seen the GOP rubber stamp many things, but the Times reporting finding that was a bridge too far, and rather than vote him down, they tried to pull him to avoid the embarrassment. And so this is where the law and the Senate confirmation process clash, right, and combine. I want to play for you something that Rachel Maddow said, not to be clear about this news, which is brand new, but what we're left with as a kind of a system right now. Take a listen.
People push back on these things. Republican senators and members of Congress can't defend what Trump is doing. And so then they start to push back against Trump on it as well. And then Trump caves. That's what we've learned over the 100 days. That's the system. It's not a great system, but it's a system.
It's certainly not Jeffersonian Hamilton checks and balances, a high level, but it's a system that involves tonight, whether Trump is embarrassed by it or not, or people hear about it or not, at a reality level, this person tied to Jan 6th being withdrawn, Trump backing down. Your view as someone who knows so many of these players and the power of that particular U.S. Attorney's Office, your view on this tonight.
Well, this is not the first nomination that Trump has pulled in his second presidency. Remember that Matt Gaetz, originally put forward as Attorney General, pulled when it became clear that even if the Senate could stomach RFK, they couldn't stomach somebody with Gaetz's, shall we call it, unique record. So this is not the first time you've had a law enforcement related figure being pulled rather than coming down in flames in an embarrassing defeat. Ed Martin, who's the candidate for the U.S. Attorney position in D.C., has a particularly stark track record involvement in the events of January 6th. Since he was appointed on an interim basis to the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, he has promised to use his powers to go after Elon Musk's political enemies.
Yep.
He has gone after Georgetown Law School on the ground that it teaches things that he disagrees with. And he's gone after, most astonishingly, in my view, the journals published by our leading public health and medical science institutions in which peer-reviewed work comes out about the cutting edge of medical science. Apparently, Mr. Martin believes that medical science should conform to his ideological dictates. So we have here a candidate for, as you said, a tremendously important public office who, in a very short time, even setting aside his involvement in January 6th, has managed to build up a really quite extraordinary record of using public power, using the power of the prosecutor to explicitly ideological ends without even bothering to hide that ball.
Yeah. I appreciate your mastery of the recent details because it's a lot to keep track of. And then again, the silver lining of sorts, which is some of these things do get stopped. And then they're very quick to hide and move on and try to basically avoid people finding out that there is power in the people, power in the pushback. Aziz Hook, great to see you again. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Ari.
Absolutely. We've got some news tonight on a healthcare clash that's important, and Al Sharpton coming back on the program. It's a busy Thursday. Stay with us. There's a new pope. More than 1 billion Catholics across the world now celebrating their leader. Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost is Pope Leo XIV, and he's the first American-born pope selected after 4 rounds of voting that lasted just over 24 hours. Giving an address today that called for unity, he said, "Together, we can be a missionary church that builds bridges, always open to receiving everyone and to welcoming everyone." He succeeds one of the more progressive popes in this modern era, Pope Francis. That is the big news we wanted to cover. When we return, as mentioned, the healthcare backlash and why Republicans are under pressure on a longstanding issue here, next. We now have our Al edition of Fallback. 2 great guests, 2 Als. I'll be sure, the R&B legend, Grammy-nominated singer who pioneered, the new jack swing genre you might remember from the 80s and 90s. Feeling better already. He has a forthcoming memoir, Do You Believe Me Now, and hosts the podcast Don't Let the Love Songs Fool You. And then the other Al, MSNBC's Al, America's Al, the Reverend Al Sharpton, who also knows a thing or two about music from his days with the Godfather, Soul, James Brown. He is, of course, a civil rights leader and legend, founder of the National Action Network, and something of a beat legend. We have some good news there that we will get to in a moment. Welcome to both of you, the two Als. Rev, what's on your fallback list?
My fallback is that Mother's Day is coming and people are going to have to dig deep to get flowers. I do not understand how anyone could manage having flowers go up leading into Mother's Day. Insensitivity is one thing, but this is beyond offensive. Everybody loves to give flowers to mama and grandma, and now you're going to put us in a state of with your tariffs and other things causing inflation. I can't believe somebody would do this to Mother's Day.
You want the Trump tariffs to fall back, and you want to free the flowers.
I want to free the flowers. I want mothers. I'm fighting for mothers and their flowers.
You gotta, and who can blame you for fighting for the mothers?
Got to fight for the mothers. I came out of a single mother home. Mothers should have their flowers at the same rate they had them last year.
And I'm sure you know the lyric. If you admire somebody, you should go ahead and tell them.
Absolutely.
People never get the flowers when they can still smell them.
Exactly.
Okay.
What's
on your list?
Rev makes a good point. My mother's currently in hospice right now. So
I'm sorry.
you for the prayers. So I will have to bring those flowers. But I wanted to start with the potential rollback of Medicaid expansion by the GOP.
Yeah.
And it could significantly impact millions of Americans, particularly those in the underserved and disenfranchised communities we currently advocate for in the halls of Congress, related to equal access of quality health care, specifically for my transplant community around America.
And when you talk about Medicaid, I mean, people forget we've had all the talk about Elon Musk cuts and this and that. This is health care that people need. Medicaid and Medicare are for the people who are elderly or need it, meaning they may not have the funds to go out and get a private health insurance job. And cutting that seems not only cruel, but it's not usually very cost effective, because then those people have other problems that they're still living in this country.
Absolutely. There's an often forgotten section of the population who rely on the services for their healthcare needs, such as alternative options, to coverage that we're not going to find, because if they cut them, there's no alternative. And, it's from the neighborhood that I grew up in. So it's a passion of mine.
Personal,
When we're in Congress, I say very specifically, listen, I'm not here for the politics. I'm not here for the next election. I'm simply here to save lives of transplant patients.
Yeah. What else is on your list, Rev?
I think, secondly, I'm very concerned about the cutback in terms of fighting for what we called civil rights is now being interpreted differently. They're saying we're going against anti-Christian bias. I've been in civil rights all my life. I've not seen a lot of anti-Christian bias. I've seen anti-Black, I've seen anti-Latino, I've seen anti-Semitic. So now the Department of Justice is saying civil rights for anti-Christian. I'm a Baptist minister. I definitely would be against it, but you cannot fight something that does not exist. So I'm falling back on the recreation and mishandling of Civil Rights Bureau in the Justice Department.
Yeah, Ava DuVernay was talking about it this week, how when you read some of these executive orders, she said they're so backwards, she finds it encouraging. Because it's not logical, and they're not going to be able to stand on it. And it is Orwellian, to use a word we hear a lot nowadays with this autocratic creep, where you have the government telling you bondage is freedom.
Right.
Austerity is prosperity. I mean, it's all upside down.
It's all upside down, and it's so illogical that even his own group around him has a hard time defending it. And to think about, you have a billionaire that came in, multi-billionaire, by the way, that came in to to fire government workers in the name of streamlining the budget and the economy. Who would even think of getting a huge billionaire to decide what people that are government workers are going to be able to keep their jobs and maintain their families?
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
No, it's wild, and I appreciate you bringing that to the table. We turn to this good news we have right now. This is local news. This is local MSNBC beat news here before we get out of here. And
there's nothing local about the beat, but go ahead.
Respect. I appreciate that. And we tallied this up and found, the numbers tell the story. So this is just what happened over 8 years, over 1,000 shows. A lot of different stuff has happened. But when you go and you look, today marks Reverend Al Sharpton's 10th fallback appearance, which makes him the all-time fallback champion. Okay? No one has done more fallbacks on this show or this channel than you, Reverend Al, and some of them are up here, you see. But we'll put the screen back up. I'm going to show again because I was going to read off. There you go. Upper left, you got Nems, okay? Lower right, you got Harry Mack, who freestyled for you. Far left, you got June Ambrose and the bunny ears. Lower left, you got you and Bootsy Collins. What does it mean to you, Rev? Congratulations.
I feel like a great champion. But the thing that keeps my ego in check, I was walking out of 30 Rock one day after doing my show, and a lady just went crazy, said, Al. And I smiled, and she knocked me out the way and grabbed Al B. Short. So it keeps me humble.
I like that, and I got to meet you at his conference. But what does it tell you about Rev that he is really multifaceted? Because that happened organically, because he really can get down with all kinds of people.
Absolutely. You know, it's been incredible. As the executive chairman of the Health Equity and Transplantation Coalition, Reverend Sharpton has lent his magnificent Yankee Stadium light on the just the simple fact that we need a software update in our healthcare system.
All right, but I'm asking you about Reverend Al Sharpton doing this. You're like one of the politicians. You're giving me the political talking point.
Yeah.
What do you think about him being so versatile? Because before I got to know you, I didn't know that you civil rights, serious stuff, advocacy, politics, but then the fun, the music, the fashion. That's what I want to know.
But that's the part of it.
Because you know him. What do you think about that?
But I love it. But that's what I was saying. Reverend Sharpton will advocate, and he will be with the mothers of slain young people. And then he's in the halls of Congress fighting for transplant. It's a vast array of his skills.
And then I can hang out with Al B, and I can tell them the history of James Brown because I was in the dressing room with him. So I can tell when people, no pun intended, are off the beat.
Hey, both of you guys are, of course, legends in your own right. I love seeing you together. And again, this just happened. Today is the day you clinched it. Now, who knows what'll happen? If somebody else gets near you, we'll let you know. If somebody's chasing you up to your title, okay?
Just give me a fair shot.
Our thanks to Two Owls. That's the beat.